Tep, and welcome to another edition of Community Cop. My name is Noel, one of the co-founder members of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. I'm here today with only one of my co-hosts, Michael Graves, aka Big Mike.
Namaste, brother.
Unfortunately, Julian Harper is on Community Cop assignment, and he won't be with us today, but we like to welcome you, our viewing audience. We've been going for a couple of weeks in acknowledgement of the holidays, the past holidays. So we'd like to welcome our viewing audience to our first program in 2021. This is where truth and real talk occurs. So let's get right into it. So many things have occurred since we last met. So we have a whole lot to talk about. But as is customary, let's start out with our historical piece. Michael, we want to acknowledge our great ancestor, George Washington Carver, who had a birthday in January 1864, and he actually made his transition in the same month of January in 1943. Why don't you remind our viewing audience about this great ancestor?
I have no trepidation in saying that George Washington Carver was, in all likelihood, the greatest scientist ever produced in America. The way he revolutionized agriculture, not only what he did with the peanut, which he's known for, all the tens of, hundreds of things that were done with the peanut, but what he did with flour, with flowers, the way he was able to cultivate and create so much that he was recruited by everybody under the sun. Even Henry Ford himself solicited him for ideas with respect to everything from the Ford, the Ford Motor Company and how to put that together. One of his philosophy and his thinking on how to arrange things, just, organization. But, we thank God that he was able to go to Tuskegee Institute, where he was able to teach and live on the grounds. He did not receive much in terms of money, but he wanted to give something back, and that's what he did. One of the greatest minds ever. People normally refer to Einstein so much. Einstein has nothing on George Washington Carver. Absolutely nothing. One of the greatest scientists we've ever seen in the world, bar none, is George Washington Carver.
All right. And our second ancestor we like to acknowledge is going to the African continent, is Brother Sekou Toure. He brought independence to Guinea after they were oppressed under colonial rule. Remind our viewing audience about the history of our ancestor, Sekou Toure.
Yeah, he comes in the pantheon of great ones, right there with Kwame Toure, Nyeri, and so many others who brought independence and was able to throw off the yoke of colonialism. He's one of the great ones and was a great friend at the same time of Kwame Nkrumah, the great Asajifu, and was able to assist Ghana so much when the French left Guinea. It was Kwame Nkrumah who was able to assist Guinea, and then he in turn assisted Nkrumah when he was through the CIA plot when he was overthrown. So they both did for each other. And when you look at Sekou Toure, one of the greatest Black men we've ever produced in the last century and of all time, another great one. We should never forget the contributions of the great Sekou Toure.
All right, and this is important for the family to understand when you look at some of the problems that Africa has, be it economically, educational-wise, or structural-wise. The African continent was under colonial rule for many generations, where Europeans just came in there and depleted their societies of natural resources, and they contributed nothing, absolutely nothing, to the development not only of the country but the citizens as well. The citizens were kept oppressed, exploited, were forced many times to work for the European colonial powers for little wages. They were oppressed. So, you know, Africa today, although in this year and last year's and a few years past, Africa has really, you know, made many advancement. But because of, you know, the colonialization by Europeans, it retarded Africa's growth. We were enslaved by Europeans all over the diaspora, and the African continent was colonized. So we have to acknowledge those individuals, warriors who organized with their own kith and kin and overthrew many of these European powers who are far more advanced as it relates to military weapons, but they didn't have God on their side, nor did they have the heart that the Africans had. So much kudos, and we should always remember our ancestor, Brother Sekou Toure, for the courage to overthrow and bring independence to his people in Guinea. All right, and we thank you for that, Michael. Many of you know that there's a lot that has gone on recently with the United States as it relates to electoral politics. We want to reflect on the case before we talk about what has happened recently of Tamir Rice. Many of you may know Tamir Rice was the young man that was shot by a police officer while he was playing in the park.
Actually, he was a child. He was a child.
Right, he was a child while he was playing in the park with a toy gun. Someone had called 911 and said that a child was playing in the park. They said most likely the weapon that he had was a toy. This was put over the 911 call. And when police officers responded, they just jumped out their car and shot this young black man. Well, the Department of Injustice had made a decision this week stating that the officers will not be charged. They claim that video of the shooting was too poor for prosecutors to conclusively establish what happened. That's their explanation. And that's such a weak and pathetic explanation. It shows that they was just grappling at straws just to find something to say. The officer lied about what occurred. The officer's action was inappropriate. They didn't take cover. They knew they were dealing with a child. They knew this was in the park. You know, they had all the capabilities of taking cover. You know, there was no need to use deadly physical force as quickly as they did. Ultimately, there was no reason whatsoever to use deadly physical force, but they didn't give the sensitivity to this particular situation that they would have given if they seen a white child in the park. You know, but the Department of Injustice had made a decision not to charge the officers. We sort of knew that, but what they do is with a lot of other cases that we're waiting for decisions, they wait to years after our community is no longer organized about the particular situation. The protests have died out, the passion and the fervor has died out in the community. Then they come out with these unjust decisions. So this is just one of many unjust decisions that we've had over a number of individuals that were unfortunately murdered at the hands of law enforcement. Michael, did you want to say anything about this particular decision by the Department of Injustice?
Yeah, let me just say briefly about DOJ. We knew what was going to happen under the Justice Department, but when this originally happened, this was the Justice Department where President Obama was in effect. I'm almost certain that this happened so long ago that this was prior to President Trump, which means that in between Eric Holder or Loretta Lynch, they could have brought justice to a case that the state of Ohio ignored. The prosecutor there refused to prosecute the two police officers. The police officers only faced internal departmental charges with respect to not having the correct time that the car drove up to the little play area where the other children were inside the school and Tamir Rice was outside in that little play area you described earlier, Noel. They didn't put the exact time that they arrived there, and then they lied with respect to saying they gave him several verbal instructions that he refused to comply with. If you watch the videotape, and I don't even know if that's still on the internet, but if it is, you'll see that within 1.5 seconds, not even 2 seconds, less than 2 seconds, they pulled up, jumped out of the car, and started shooting like it was Al Capone or somebody like that, or John Gotti or somebody. Well, they wouldn't even have dared to even shoot Gotti like that, but they pulled up quickly, pulled out the weapon without speaking, and shot a 12-year-old child dead. And that cop was later found. He got hit with charges for not even pointing out his prior job as a police officer in a smaller police force. He was found to be inadequate, just lost all protocols and lost control on a firing range. So they knew that he did not have the proper temperament to become a police officer. So they fired him on that alone. But all of that was in his jacket. So they should have been able to look at his personnel folder and see all of those things. So in any event, the state prosecutor dropped the ball, the feds dropped the ball, and we are in the same position that we all often find ourselves in: delay, 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 then ultimately deny.
And this is, as you stated, Michael, this is reminiscent of the 1973 police shooting of 10-year-old Clifford Glover. There's no way in the world a police officer, even if he was a trained police officer, even if he was a grown man, wouldn't give a child a benefit of the doubt if he seen him with something in his hand. And as I stated earlier, when the officers got the 911 call, the caller even stated that the gun that the young child might be playing with may be a toy. So, you figure that. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
No, you're right, Noel. But at the time, even at the exact moment they drove up, the toy gun wasn't in his hand. It was in his back pocket. So they had no excuse.
Right.
They had time to talk to him.
Right. So it's no way in the world that police officers should have used deadly physical force. But as you stated, Michael, the strategy is deny, deny, deny. And unfortunately, our young brother will receive no justice. All right. We want to fast forward into the talk of the day. On Wednesday, January 6th, there was an insurrection at the U.S. Capitol building. Some of you may know that the House and the Senate were meeting regarding counting the electoral votes for President-elect Joe Biden. And Donald Trump had held a rally not too far away from the Capitol building. And at the completion of his rally, he encouraged those that participated, that attended his rally, to go to the Capitol building. And, and he sort of encouraged them to be proactive. He said that, they need to show some force and some power. Giuliani took it a little further and made some very inflammatory comments. A few thousand individuals who attended President rally went to the Capitol building and forced their way inside while both the House and the Senate were in session. They pushed police officers, they injured some police officers, they destroyed property, they stopped the House and the Senate from doing their job. It was a minimum insurrection, and at the aftermath is that police officers didn't do their job. The Capitol Police literally stood by and allowed these individuals to thrust themselves into this wild mob to thrust themselves into the Capitol building while they knew the congressmen and senators were present. It was a very dangerous scenario. Individuals were entering the Capitol building with backpacks. You didn't know what was in the backpacks. They had flags with long poles, some of which they used to strike the police officers to force themselves in. They climbed over the building in the manner of a terrorist in a mob. And, to say that the police officers underacted as it relates to dealing with this mob, this very violent mob, is an understatement. Those of you who may remember during the summer when Black Lives Matter had some protests to the Capitol building and in Washington, D.C., that they were met with dozens of fully armed machine gun soldiers, National Guards, the military, the police, et cetera, came to their protests fully armed and fully prepared. But in this particular protest of mostly Donald Trump supporters, predominantly white, the police had basically no presence whatsoever, even though they received ample warning via the internet about what was about to happen. They received warnings that these individuals was very upset and they intended to stop the House and the Senate from making a decision as it relates to the electoral votes. So they received ample warning, but they did not prepare themselves, and that was intentional. Clearly, when they deal with white groups, white organizations, white protesters, they have a different mentality from when they're dealing with blacks. Michael, now there's a lot of chatter. There's a lot of people feigning as if they're surprised. This is the order of the day as it relates to law enforcement. Different approaches to members of the African-American and Latino community as it relates to white members of the white community. And we're talking about white citizens. We're talking about white mobs, white protests, whatever. There's always a different approach from law enforcement to these different communities. Why don't you talk about some of your observations of this insurrection at the Capitol building?
Well, that's a lot to unpeel, brother, but let's get started with it from the outset.
Take your time, brother, take your time.
Yeah, from the outset, I think you're right to mention the rally that was held prior to, because it had an impact on the actual taking over of the Capitol building. From the outset, you're right that President Trump talked about fighting, and he pointed out that he would be with them. So they were under the impression that as they marched down the block to storm the building, that he would be nearby and actually be with them. Now, Donald Trump Jr. talked about fight, 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 and he said the Republican Party is the party of Trump, is Trump's party. Giuliani went on talking about, we're gonna lock him up, which was a constant thing in the Trump administration for 4 years. Actually, even while he was campaigning, locked them up, talking about certain Democrats. With Obama, as he alleged, there was some kind of investigation into his personal life. And he talked about Secretary Clinton, that she needs to be locked up.
Let me interject real quick, Mike. I'm sorry. The statement from Giuliani was he wanted to see a trial by combat.
Yeah, that's what I was getting ready to say. That
okay.
He went on to say that after talking about locking them up, about force, using force, and being serious about it, he went on to say, he ended it by saying, trial by combat. In other words, don't go down there pussyfoot. You go down there to take care of business. And this was the theme throughout Donald Trump Jr., President Trump, and also Rudolph Giuliani. Now, before I get ahead of myself, this is not strange for Rudolph Giuliani. This is a man who led a police riot against then Mayor David Dinkins. And when I say police riot, right, in New York City, and I'm actually saying that the majority of the people at the rally were police officers who committed crimes, standing on cars, and of course he was using curse words to describe David Dinkins. Just to clean it up, he called him a washroom attendant. And you might say, well, it's nothing wrong with that, but we're talking about the first Black mayor of New York City and an arrogant former federal prosecutor that's calling him a washroom attendant. This is not coming from a guy on the street playing the dozens. this is, he was probably the number 3 or 4 man in the Justice Department. And that's what he's referring to a sitting mayor as, a washroom attendant. So this is not unusual for him to say trial by combat. And this is not unusual for a man as mayor who ordered an early move with the police department onto the Million Youth March, which was totally unnecessary. What he did, he shot the gun by going ahead of schedule. Instead of the scheduled time that the rally was supposed to end, he just ordered the troops in, and he ordered, which we can all take personal, Noel, because you was there. We were all there, 100 Blacks in law enforcement. We saw a helicopter drop down, and our field marshal extraordinaire, Eric Josie, wrote to the FAA and put in a complaint about it, that helicopter came as low as the 3rd floor. We had men, women, and children. We had women that had baby carriages with toddlers in those baby carriages. And when that helicopter swooped down, it created turmoil, and we had to help maintain order. We were grabbing people. We were trying to navigate women to get their babies out of that area of conflict. So this is Rudolph Giuliani. So it's not like he morphed into something. He was always there. So now they went down the avenue and went to the Capitol building and took it over clear instructions from Donald Trump Jr., Donald Trump, president, and also the president's, I guess, top attorney, Rudolph Giuliani, under their instructions. Well, they went down there and took over the building. And I want to say that some of the people who were scaling the building, scaling the patio area where the steps were, they had military training. The average person cannot scale a wall like that. So you either got military training or paramilitary training. In other words, you're either full military or you're probably law enforcement, because you have that kind of training where you can scale the side of a wall. Well, they did that. Now, Noel, and I need you to help me out with this one. I want you to tell me why the PBA and the FOP is silent. A police officer was killed. He died today. That officer that they beat down died today. 4 civilians dead, 1 police officer trying to defend the Capitol building was killed. He died today. I haven't heard one peep from the PBA. I haven't heard anything from FOP. Now I'm wondering, why are they silent when a police officer lay dead now and they got to bury a soldier who was trying to do his job, and yet now total silence?
Now I know that's a rhetorical question. I'm gonna put it right back to you, but I'll answer it that there's a lot of sympathy amongst law enforcement agencies throughout the country. The union head of the Chicago Police Department even threw support today for the marchers. So there's a lot of sympathy, and that's why there was a very little resistance from law enforcement officers to this mob, to these criminals, because a lot of police officers sympathize with not only the mob, but with the Donald Trumps and the Mayor Giuliani's. There's even some police officers taking photos with some of the invaders, selfies with some of the invaders. But I know it was a rhetorical question, but that, in short, is the answer. Be it the FOP, there's a Fraternal Order of Police, the union that represent police officers around the nation, or the PBA, which is a union that represents New York City police officers. There's a lot of sympathy with the rioters, with their philosophy, with Donald Trump, with white supremacy and white dominance.
Pat Lynch has a history, a long history of calling Black people thugs,
Animals.
animals. Well, I'm trying to think of his favorite term that he uses besides thugs.
Mopes, and scales.
Term, but it's an animalistic term.
Mopes and scales. He called them mutts, scales, and mopes.
He's used the term mutts. So he uses the negative terms, which shows you, first of all, that he's describing a Black person, you know, whether he says moolies or mutts and the different terms that you use. But he always has the term thugs when he's describing a Black person, especially if this person was killed by a police officer. He takes it further. He has no sympathy for the family, so he refers to them as thugs. Well, I just want to see the PBA, I want to see the FOP say something. A police officer was killed by terrorists, domestic terrorists, and they're saying nothing. If a Black man had killed a police officer, you would have heard from literally every police department all over the country. You haven't heard anything yet from them. You spoke to deferential treatment with respect to how they handle literally allowing Trump's people, white supremacists, white supremacist terrorists, white supremacist militias, whites that have training that they could scale walls. They were allowed literally a free pass into an area that's supposed to be well protected. The leadership of the country was in the lawmakers of the country, leaders. Even the VP was in there. Speaker of the House, Senate Majority Leader, the incoming one and the outgoing one were all in there. And they allowed it to go down. This is deferential treatment. I even saw the scene, I don't know if you saw that scene, Noel, of the Black police officer who was being chased by one white man. Now they had other guys far behind him. The brother backed up a few steps, picked up his baton, which I'm gonna assume he dropped, picked up a baton. The white guy came close to him. He couldn't swing. He refused to defend himself against white flesh. He backed up. The white guy kept coming. He ran up a flight of stairs. The white guy was chasing him instead of the other way around. The white guy was in his house. He wasn't in the white guy's house. The white guy was able to chase him up the stairs. They went up one flight. The guy stopped and acted like he was gonna hit him. He's talking to the white guy. The white guy came at him again. He went up another flight of stairs. The white guy chased him again. When he went up about the third flight of stairs, it was other police officers up there. And when he saw white cops with their batons, that's when he stopped. He knew that this white guy, that the Black cop was a damn coward. A no good damn coward. That Black would not have allowed me or you to step to him that way. He wouldn't have allowed it. But look what he allowed to happen. A white cop, a white guy, civilian, to step to him that way. Well, I saw that in plain sight. And before I go further, I just want to know your thoughts on that, Noel.
Well, you know, what's also telling that when he ultimately did get to the top where there were other officers present, when that white individual approached him and the other officers, along with a group of other individuals, there was like a standoff. The officers were asking them, could they leave? Could they step back? There was no swinging the batons. And brother, there's no way, shape, or form you can convince me that if this was a group of Blacks doing this, acting in the way that this thuggish crowd did, that there wouldn't have been a physical confrontation. That black officer might even swung his baton if he was dealing with a black person. These officers,
of course he would.
These officers dealt with this mob with kid gloves, and the only thing that I can reason I can think of is that there's complicity. You know, they do not see fellow white. They give white people, whether they're criminal or not criminals, this white skin privilege. They treat them like human beings. When we talk about Tamir Rice earlier, we talked about how the officer prematurely came out of his vehicle and shot him. He would never did that to a white child, even if the white child had a submachine gun in his hand. So there's something in this country that we have to deal with, and you hear a lot of people, even white representatives, talking about the duplicity in treatment, talk about the duplicity in response by law enforcement agencies to white groups, white protesters and black protesters. They give that lip service. It's nothing new. This is absolutely nothing new. So to go back to your point, Michael, when you look at that video and you see there was a standoff with that black officers along with a few other police officers, they didn't proactively demand that these individuals leave with the threat of either attack or arrest. There was just verbal communication, and these invaders, these individuals who were trespassing at the Capitol building, creating a tumultuous atmosphere, a very dangerous atmosphere, because you don't know who got weapons, you don't know who maybe have bombs. These officers dealt with them with kid gloves because they were white. And white skin privilege supersedes everything, even criminality, even criminal behavior. White police officers will extend a privilege to white criminals.
Right. Now, I'm raising another question. I saw what happened in Ferguson. I saw what happened in Baltimore.
Right.
These two situations, you saw the heavy-handedness of police officers. You saw that they were not taking any shorts. They were not giving ground to anyone. You saw them in Ferguson with fatigues on.
Right.
You saw the LRADs and the MRAPs, mechanized weapons, the LRAP, the sound machine, that acoustic sound machine that can blow your eardrums, or which will discombobble your balance, and you're going down. You're gonna fall down. It'll destroy it could actually bust your eardrums. Mm-hmm. The LRAP, and then the MRAP, which is an urban tank, and it can resist pipe bombs. They claim that there were pipe bombs out there yesterday in Washington, D.C. Why didn't they come out with the MRAPs? You gonna tell me in Washington, D.C., they don't have LRADs and MRAPs?
They have everything.
They got it in Ferguson, and Ferguson has only got 21,000 people. Now you got the leadership of the so-called free world in Washington, D.C., and you didn't come with no military toys? Come on now, something about this stinks.
Right.
Here, you got the Baltimore Police Department right next door. Baltimore is not far away from Washington, D.C. You have to have mutual assistance programs. You have to have rapid redeployment of neighboring police forces that will come to your aid. Why weren't they called? Why weren't they called from Virginia, from Maryland, and other surrounding police departments to immediately come in? Why wasn't the National Guard deployed to that area to maintain order, to restore order first and then to maintain it? Those things didn't happen. Now, Baltimore is a heavy-handed police department. They killed the detective that was going to testify in federal court, Sean Suter. They killed him the very day before he was going to testify that very next morning in federal court against the gun trace unit. Well, if they're so heavy-handed and they about it and like to get busy, why didn't they go to DC and get busy? You saw what they did in Ferguson. The president of the United States, Barack Hussein Obama, had to call Ferguson and demand that they take off them damn fatigues. They had on army wear, they fully automatic weapons. They had on fatigues, coming up to Black women who had strollers with babies in them. They had fully mechanized automatic weapons trained on them. Obama saw this from the White House. And one of the few things he did that we can even mention is that he called Ferguson and told them to take them fatigues off and put on their traditional police uniform. Take them off right away. You're not in the field of battle. Take the fatigues off and pull back. Show some restraint. Go ahead, brother.
Right. So, brother, what you're pointing out and what some, and I would want the family to acknowledge that all of these admissions, by senators, by members of Congress, by TV commentators about the duplicity in police response to white protesters and Black protesters. This is something that has been going on for generations. The only reason why they have to admit it, because what happened yesterday was an embarrassment before the entire world. The whole world is looking at the United States. And as you stated, Michael, you had some of the leaders of both the Senate and the House being possibly attacked and definitely threatened by a band, by a mob, by a wild mob, and police officers stood down. This is inexplicable. So it's an embarrassment. So that's why you hear a lot of people now say that, if this was a Black crowd, a lot of people admitting that if this was a Black crowd, the police officers would have been more prepared. So it's not as if these individuals had an inability to protect the Capitol building. It's not as if these law enforcement agencies didn't know how to do it. They didn't want to. There wasn't the will. It's not
right.
as in, it would. The question is not can they. They didn't have the will to do it. They were compliant with Donald Trump. They were complicit with the mob, and I believe members of law enforcement were part of the mob. I know there was one elected official who recorded himself. Now he has since taken his video off of his website. He had just got elected in December. He was a part of the mob. So I think that, and we have to always remember, Michael, you do a very good job in Community Cop and reminding us about the numerous riots that occurred by white mobs. That is as American as apple pie. White people, and I'm not talking about the criminal element, the thugs. I'm talking about doctors, lawyers, police officers, judges, teachers, grandmothers, mothers. They have been rioting infinitum. I don't ever think there was a time that white mobs didn't riot. And there's always been complicity by law enforcement, by governors, by the elected officials in history past. We talk about white riots all the time on this program. So when people admit on TV now that police officers didn't act appropriately, they weren't prepared, and they understand it's because it was a white mob. This is something that has happened over and over again in American history. These police officers are sympathetic to the objective of this mob. I would go to say that they agreed with it. And although they didn't want to be there because some of them probably had to work, they supported it. And that's why you had this lackluster approach in 2021 by a professional law enforcement agency, Capitol Police, and not protecting these representatives, these political representatives. They could do it. They had the talent to do it, but they didn't have the will. And it jeopardized the safety of members of the House, and members of the Senate, and they stopped them from carrying on their business. It was a very important reason why they were getting together. This was counting of the electoral votes. And although you have some individuals who disagree with what happened in the elections, this is a democracy. So, there was some complicity by these law enforcement officers. And this is one of the clearest examples, that we've seen in how officers treat white protesters and Black protesters.
Well, they're being honest, but it's easy. That's what you normally call a ground ball, Noel. When Biden comes out and says that there would have been a different level of treatment had the crowd been black. Well, that's an easy one.
Right.
This was a white mob of terrorists, white militias, white supremacists, and the police department knew it. Now, Biden referred to the Capitol building as a citadel of liberty. Now, that might be a citadel of liberty to him.
Mm-hmm.
It certainly is not a citadel of liberty to us.
Facts.
Our history shows that the very same people who stood in that building and make laws, enforce laws, and shape world economies, destroy world economies, these are the very same people who illegally put in a bill of attainder that led to the death of Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad.
That's right.
They went against the very Constitution they're supposed to uplift and edify. It is against the Constitution, a bill of attainder. And that, for those who might not know, it's a decision of an august political body makes without the luxury of a trial. They chose to silence a private citizen for his thoughts and a speech that he made at King College. The reason why that's unconstitutional is because when an august body like the US Senate and the House of Representatives says that about a private citizen, something bad is gonna happen to that person. One way or the other. They're gonna get you in the wash or they're gonna get you in the rinse, but you going down. That had something to do with the death of Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad. Is bad enough that it's a whole mystery when you try to unravel how that happened. So I do not consider that building a citadel of liberty. It's not a citadel of justice. It's not a place of refinement and august law. The saying is America is a land of law, not of men. Well, they broke the law with what they did to Dr. Khalid Abdul Muhammad. They broke the law 1,001 times. They broke the law, their very laws, in allowing the killers of Tamir Rice to go free. In that building, they see cases every day. They hear of cases every day. We have elected officials from our community that see these things every day. They didn't deal with and address Camila Brock, a Black woman, and she was at that time probably about 28 years old when the police department stopped her, took her out of her vehicle because she had a late model BMW, and she claimed to be, which they found out she was, a bank manager, and they wanted to know how did she get that vehicle, and they ultimately put her in a psychological unit of a hospital because they found out the car was hers, it wasn't stolen, so they put her in that unit. Well, what elected official came to her aid? Me and you had to go to see a police officer before, Noel, who was in that similar situation, who they couldn't lock up. He didn't commit a crime, so they put him in a psychological unit of a hospital. So when these things happen and these elected officials say nothing, look at, oh man, look at what happened to our sister Janiyah McMillan. She was killed. A 16-year-old girl was at a Sweet 16 party, and they claimed she made too much noise. Well, they took her out, put her in a youth detention because she was making noise at a hotel, allegedly. They put her in a youth detention center, and a guy did jujitsu on her when she wouldn't pick up her sweatshirt, because a man is not supposed to, in a detention center, is not supposed to undress a young lady as long as there's a female officer around. Well, they in turn was able to undress her against her wishes, and the guy used jujitsu on her to make her comply, and she ended up dead, killed her. The Justice Department didn't deal with that. The Justice Department didn't deal with the Staten Island, situation. So it's too many times these things have happened and nothing happened. It's just too much for me to consider that an august place of liberty. It's not to me. It is a place where they cover crimes every day, international crimes, whether it's Gaddafi of Libya, what they did with Lumumba, just all the assassinations that go all over the world. They know about it and say nothing. So my point is that that's not a place of liberty.
Well, going back to the insurrection at the Capitol building, not only when you go through this long history about there being no arrests, there were very few arrests for these individuals who could have been charged with a whole litany of charges, including criminal trespass, insurrection, rioting, criminal mischief, a lot, and even federal charges. But very few individuals were arrested. And we all know that had this been a Black protest, that there would have been many arrests and many, many more injuries as well. And one of the things I like to say about these admissions that everybody seems to be so willing to come forward and say, in terms of comparing police response to Black protesters and white protesters, everyone is saying that they don't believe that police officers would have acted as lean as they did with the white protesters. But these admissions never transform into any changes. So what? Everybody says that. Yes, we know that police officers treat members of the African-American community more aggressively, more disrespectfully, more brutally. What are you going to do about it? And that's where it always stops at. They make the admission, the evident admission, as you said, Michael, they made the ground ball admission about duplicity and treatment by law enforcement. And that includes not only police officers, but prosecutors treat members of the African-American community differently. Judges treat members of the African-American community differently. Everyone knows it. Everyone's observed it. Everyone acknowledges it. But that's where it stops. There's never any changes. There's never any accountability. If you treat, as a police officers, members of the African-American community differently, you don't deserve to be a police officer. You should be terminated. If you're a prosecutor and you have a track record of prosecuting African-American defendants more aggressively than white defendants, similarly situated, you don't deserve to be a prosecutor. If you're a judge and you give more heavier sentences to African-Americans in comparison to white convicts, similarly situated, you don't deserve to be a judge. So when you make these admissions, when people make these admissions, it's not as some invisible entity that they're talking about. They're talking about individuals or part of an institution. So if these institutions are seen or observed to be treating members of the African-American community or any community differently, unfairly, then they don't deserve to be a part of these institutions. So, I like the fact that everybody's making these apparent admissions that there's duplicity in treatment, but I don't want it to stop there. We can no longer tolerate being treated as second-class citizens, because as Malcolm X one time said, a second-class citizen is nothing but a 21st century slave. We pay taxes, we're citizens of this country. We should be treated equally, and if not, then we got to deal with it. We can't proceed. We have to demand to be treated with respect. And everybody coming out of their foxhole to admit that police officers dealt with Black Lives Matter protesters in a more aggressive manner than they did these white invaders of the Capitol building. I'm not impressed by their observation because that's too evident. What are you going to do about it? That's the question. And that's the answer we should demand.
Well, you know yourself that, as I mentioned, in Staten Island with Eric Garner, he was never, the 7-8 police officers were never charged with his murder. They might have had a look at departmental charges with the sister who was a sergeant, but they were never charged. And that was done in plain sight. So that happened. When you look at them saying what an outrage of them to storm the Capitol building. Well, they stormed the Capitol building. Has it been stormed before? Yes. In 1814, that very same building was stormed. Britain stormed it in response to America attacking a British installation in Ontario, Canada. So when that happened in Ontario, Canada in 1813, that next year during the War of 1812, Britain attacked the Capitol building, burnt the Capitol building, burnt the White House, and the Treasury building. Now, as fate would have it, they make that into a good story by claiming that Dolly Madison, the first lady of President Madison, she saved George Washington's portrait. Those were enslaved Africans that heroically saved the portrait of George Washington that was on the wall. That's still there to this very day. Well, they claim that Dolly Madison saved it. She couldn't even save herself. It was enslaved Africans that put her in a coach and was able to get her out of there before the British got there. So in any event, this is just a tribute to white privilege. It shows that even a white thug has more rights than a black law-abiding citizen. So in this particular case, 5 people were killed, and I'm glad you mentioned all these arrests or lack thereof, because 5 people were killed yesterday, and one of them was a police officer. And the silence of police unions is deafening right now. No word on that at all. Now, those police officers, you can't get around the deferential treatment they gave to these white thugs. And you know, Pat Lynch used to say white thugs. He'd say thugs. The other word I was thinking was so easy, it was obvious. He always says animals. So he refers to blacks as animals. So these white animals that were storming the Capitol building, they received preferential treatment. As a matter of fact, even the ones that when they marched them out of the building, they thought they was gonna be handcuffed and put into police vehicles and taken away. They were surprised when the police let them go. Time to go. Now, obviously with cameras and footage that they got, they're compelled now to pick a few of them up. And some of them were already boasting early this morning on the internet. They showing their pictures of being in Pelosi's office, showing them in different parts of the Capitol building. They took selfies of themselves in it. So they're gonna be in some trouble now, only because you got 5 bodies, 5 homicides, and one of them is a police officer, and yet the police departments are not saying anything. Where's Baltimore cops? Where are Ferguson cops when you need them?
Well, I'm not too convinced, Mike. I'd have to see, because history past have shown me that there's a reluctance to fully charge white members when they're part of a large group. Like they'll give a symbolic number of prosecutions. They may prosecute 1, 2, or 3, but you know, as you stated, there are many individuals in that crowd whose face was seen, who didn't have a mask on. They were very bold and brash about their participation in this crime. It's almost as if they had no fear. This is the Capitol building. This is a federal building. You know, they committed federal crimes against the government of the United States of America, yet there was no fear. They didn't cover their face. So law enforcement agencies have the capability to identify these individuals, and not 10, not 12, not 20, not 50, not 100, not 200, not 500. There was thousands of individuals who participated in this criminal act that even they're calling of insurrection, which is a great crime. So, and as you stated, Michael, individuals' life was lost as a result of their participation in this mob activity. So they should be charged, all of them that participated. As I stated, their face is clearly seen. So their identity, the overwhelming majority of them should be able to be identified. But there's always a reluctance, we talked about this complicity. And it emanates not only from police officers, but from prosecutors, unwillingness to aggressively prosecute white people, irregardless of what they do. Julian always get me on that particular word. Regardless of what they do, there's a reluctance for white prosecutors to treat white criminals and to prosecute them in an aggressive manner. So, we'll see whether or not there's an aggressive attempt by law enforcement authorities to identify each and every individual that participated in this insurrection, and they're calling it an insurrection against the American government. We'll see.
Well, they didn't do anything in Michigan. When they took over the legislature in Michigan, they didn't do anything. As a matter of fact, when the sheriff was asked, why didn't you do anything to those individuals? He said that maybe those individuals that was going after the Michigan governor and was trying to kidnap her and perhaps kill her, the sheriff said, well, maybe they thought they was doing their duty, doing a citizen's arrest because of her crimes by closing down shops because of the COVID-19 virus.
Right.
So it showed you law enforcement and white supremacist militias, there's a relationship. Right. And I point out the average person cannot scale a wall. That takes training.
But I want to go back to what you just stated before we close, is the complicity and the undeniable, unabashed, open excuses leading members of law enforcement repeatedly make for these individuals. As I stated today,
like you said,
and district attorneys. And this is something that we have to deal with as a community. We can no longer accept being treated as 21st century second-class citizenships or 21st century slaves. Either it's going to be even Steven or it's going to be nothing. Law enforcement agencies repeatedly make excuses for white criminals. Why? Because they agree with them. They're sympathetic. They would want to participate if they didn't have, was receiving a paycheck. That's why they articulate this sympathy, or they make excuses for this type of behavior. As I stated earlier, the Chicago union leader make excuses for what happened yesterday when these individuals invaded the Capitol building. We cannot accept alone admissions that everyone now is making about the duplicity and enforcement by law enforcement agencies. We must demand to be treated equally, or else things aren't going on as usual. Mike, we have to close down the program. So your final words.
I would just say Donald Trump, it was described as being enthusiastic when he saw what was going on at the Capitol building. And I'm going to figure that Giuliani, as well as Donald Trump Jr., they were all enthusiastic watching crime take place with domestic terrorists. If that's not going to wake up Black men, women, and children all over the country, I don't know what will. So I'll just say, Black man, Black woman, protect the Black child, accept your own, and be yourself.
And on behalf of Community Cop and 100 Blacks Law Enforcement Who Care, we'd like to thank our engineers, Veronica Kitt, Nat Wood, Sheila Berry, and Master D. We'd like to thank you, our viewing audience. We'd like to hear some comments on our YouTube page. We'd like to hear some comments on our Facebook page as it relates to the program and some of the issues that we discussed. We're going to keep abreast of what happens, how this particular situation is going to be resolved, whether or not there's going to be mass arrests. Some of us have high hopes for the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I'm not one of them. I don't think, other than cosmetic differences, other than the tenet and the tone that he may have, is definitely going to be different from Donald Trump. Substance differences, I don't believe so. I believe that the Democrats and Republicans are in cahoots with this problem that we identify as white supremacy. I don't think the nature of law enforcement in this country is going to be any different. He picked a Department of Justice head who's more cushy with prosecutors. He picked some civil rights attorneys for lower positions in the DOJ, but you want to be the man, you want to be the shot caller, because it's the shot caller, it's the one in the head position that dictates the tone and tenet of his particular agency. So there's a lot of disappointment about that. Is there going to be any change? I don't believe so, but time will tell. As it relates to the prosecutions of these people who invaded the Capitol building, we'll see if there's going to be future arrests. And Michael, you have some closing words in the last few seconds?
Yeah, I'll just say that the number 4 person in the Justice Department now is a Black woman. But look, she got 3 people over her.
All right. Thank you, family. We'll see you next week. Julian, hopefully you'll be with us next week. Community Cop family, we love you. Peace.